What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our college football channel. We continue with our 2023 schedule preview record projection series. TCU is up next. Of course, a team that surprised everyone and went to the college football playoff last year. Can they do it again? Can they get back to being, or can they get back to maybe just a top 10, a New Year's Six type team this year? We'll see. Here's the schedule that they have. They will open up the season on September the 2nd against Colorado, playing Deion Sanders and his new team. That will be interesting. They play Nichols on September the 9th. On the road at Houston, September 16th. I was thinking about the new teams coming into the Big 12 and potential rivalries that could develop. Could you maybe see TCU and Houston being a potential rivalry down the road, or maybe like a Cincinnati, West Virginia? Just something I was thinking about before I recorded this video, but we'll see how that one goes. That should be a really good game, fascinating game there. TCU on the road at Houston. SMU, who they've been playing almost every year as of late, that's kind of a rivalry there, so that'll be a fun one. And then they'll close out the month of September on the 30th, though, the home game against West Virginia. So not too terrible of a start if you look at the first month of the season. Those first 5 games in September, definitely winnable games for TCU. And then they roll into the month of October with a road game at Iowa State on October the 7th. That could be a tricky game there. I think, Iowa State's a tough place to play, and I think that team could be pretty good this year. I think they could be a bit of a surprise team. We'll see how that plays out. BYU on October the 14th. They'll get that game at home. Then it's on the road at Kansas State October 21st. Of course, looking for some revenge after the Big 12 championship game. That shapes up to be one of the biggest games probably in the Big 12 next year. And then they will get a Thursday night game on the road at Texas Tech. So they get a bye week after Kansas State. Then they get a Thursday night game on the road at Texas Tech. That will also be a pretty tricky game there. You look at the back-to-back road games. But again, good news is you get a bye week. But it's always tough to play those weekday games, those Thursday, Friday night games on the road. Always tough to do. So that could be a tough matchup there. Then they'll play Texas on November the 11th. That'll be a home game, followed up with Baylor also at home. This time, this one will be on November 18th. And then a Friday game on the road at Oklahoma to close out the season. So that's a pretty tough stretch there from Kansas State to Oklahoma. Those final 5 games will be pretty challenging here for the Horned Frogs. So we'll get into the projections here. If you're wondering, last season, I predicted TCU to go 8-4. So, I missed the mark. They were 12-0 in the regular season. But I was higher on this team than most people, putting them at 8-4. Our projection last year, when we did the same thing we're about to do here, had them at 7-5. So 7-5 was a projection. My prediction was 8-4. This team beat both of those, obviously, by going 12-0. So this is the scale that we'll use to do the projection. You'll have your games in the white, 40 to 60%. Those are your 50-50 games that could go either way. Games where I think the spread will be less than a touchdown. Under 20, over 80 games where I think the spread will be more than 20. 20 to 29, 71 to 80 games where I think the spread will be 10 to 19 points in that range. And then 30 to 39, 61 to 70. Those are games where I think the spread will be about a touchdown, 6, 7, 8 points. So we'll get into the projection here. Also, going back to the schedule, if you're wondering, the 2 teams that they do not play from the traditional Big 12, from the Big 12 we've had for the last few years, they don't play Oklahoma State, and they don't play Kansas. And, those are really teams you might want to play this year. Those are teams that you figure to be maybe in the middle of the pack, potentially the bottom half of the Big 12. You'd like to avoid Texas and Oklahoma, but no, they'll play both of them. So it is a pretty difficult schedule there in the Big 12. And then if you look at the newcomers, they'll play Houston and BYU. No Cincinnati, no UCF. So maybe you get the better draw out of the new teams. But still, again, Oklahoma State and then also the 2 new teams. Those are the teams that they will not play. And in Kansas. So Oklahoma State, Kansas, UCF, and Cincinnati. Those are the 4 teams out of the Big 12 that they will not play. So we'll start here with the projections. We'll start with the easy wins. I think you've got one of those. Nichols, FCS team, shouldn't be any problem there. I think TCU should roll. So for this projection, and this is a big reason why this is different from our predictions, which will come later, we're kind of basing this off of how the teams finished last year and we'll kind of move them a little bit in the direction that we think they're going to go. So no, I don't think TCU is going to be a top 4 team, but you look at where they finished last year, and so I still kind of have to put them in that top tier, and I think they will be in the top tier, don't get me wrong. I just don't think they'll be a playoff team. But we have to kind of figure out where these teams are going to be roughly when we do this. And then you have a lot of question marks about a lot of these teams like Colorado. How good are they going to be? Well, based off of how terrible they were last year, I think we're going to put that game in the blue, along with Houston, SMU, West Virginia, and BYU. So these are all games that I think TCU will be favored by double digits. Again, it's hard to say. Colorado was awful last year. They could turn out to be really good this year. I mean, it's going to be such a different team. Houston on the road, that one's borderline for me. Thought about putting it as more of an 8-point spread for TCU, but Houston really wasn't that great last year. SMU wasn't that great. West Virginia, they're kind of stuck right now. BYU wasn't great last year. So given where these teams finished last year, I think it's fair to put all of these in the blue for TCU. And I think they'll be favored by about 10 points in most of these games. We'll see how it plays out, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. So these will be, all 6 of these games will be counted as wins when we do the projection. Then we get to the other games. We'll go now to the games in the purple, games that I think TCU will be favored by less than or around a touchdown, 6, 7, 8 points in that range. I think you've got 3 of these: Iowa State, Texas Tech, and Baylor. I think TCU will clearly be in a tier above these teams, but not way above them. Iowa State's a tough place to play. Again, I believe this team will be better next year. They played in some close games last year, a lot of close games. So that's one that the spread's probably not going to be very high. Texas Tech, they could be a top 25 team this year. They've got a lot coming back. They play that game on the road, so I don't think TCU would be a big favorite there. And I think Baylor, they were young last year. I think Baylor will be pretty good this year. But home field advantage for TCU, that makes this one kind of tough. Where will the spread be? Will it be 8 or 9, or will it be 10 or 11? I'm going to say 8 or 9, and again, we'll put these 3 games in the purple. That leaves Kansas State, Texas, and Oklahoma, and these are really your 50-50 games. For me, the top tier, it's TCU, Texas. Kansas State's kind of right there as well. Oklahoma, maybe in that next tier, but TCU going to play them on the road. That's why I have this one in the 50-50 category. These are the 3 games. These are 3 huge games. They're all in the second half of the season. Really, in the last 5 games, 3 of their biggest games. So they'll have a pretty easy start to the season. If they can get through a road test against Iowa State, there's a really good chance they start off 7-0. But that schedule does toughen up there. Kansas State on the road, Texas, Oklahoma, those are going to be tough games. And again, I think these are going to be your 50-50 games where I think the spread will be less than a touchdown. So what's the projection when we average all this out? Again, we count the blue and the green games as wins. Use 65% for the purple, 50% for the white. Average those numbers out, and you get a 10-2 projection for TCU. So a little bit higher than I anticipated. But because you've got 6 games that we're almost counting as being wins, that really helps this projection out and gets it up to 10-2. Again, that is assuming TCU is a top 10, 15 team again next season. If they're not, obviously the projection would change. But yeah, they're closer to 9-3 than they are 11-1, but they were over that 9.5 win mark when you did the math. And again, that's going to give you a 10-2 projection. I would say that's probably going to be the highest projection out of any team in the Big 12, which again makes sense because this team did go 12-0 last season. So that is the projection for TCU, 10-2 in 2023.